TV.
Thank you, everyone, for coming. This is great, a great turnout. So I don't see that anybody distributed an agenda. So let me quickly maybe just read to everyone then what we issued as our agenda, and it's divided into two sections. The first is meeting objectives, and the second is just titled agenda. But let me quickly read it, just so that we're all on the same page, or at least starting with the same thinking. First, to provide an opportunity for meeting participants to raise their concerns and questions directly with the selectmen. This is a listening session. Second, to clarify current plans and thinking around the development of senior housing in town, and especially on the state hospital property and associated properties. Third, to further explore specific preferences or of different segments of the senior population and to clarify options that might be best address those specific preferences. Fourth, to provide meeting participants with the general sense of timeframes for actions towards making progress on this overall issue. And lastly, to move closer to establishing a shared set of expectations between the town and seniors around what can reasonably be accomplished without specific timeframes and cost parameters, within specific timeframes and cost parameters.
I'm having trouble hearing you. Is the microphone on?
How's that? Is that better? All right, I'm closer to it now. Thank you. So did people get that well enough, or does that need to get repeated? Couldn't hear you, Tony.
Why don't you make a copy of it and distribute the audio?
How's that? We have a request and we immediately have handouts. Anything else you need done? So let me read the agenda items then. First, opening discussion of the situation regarding the development of senior housing in town to include highlights of current plans and discussions of longer range possibilities. Second, exploration of specific preferences of different segments of the senior population, extending the analysis contained in the senior housing study report. Third, open discussion, question and answers around the path forward. Fourth, specific discussion of key issues relating to the development of senior housing. And there are four subheads under that: handling land acquisition costs for senior housing projects, handling development maintenance costs, condo fees. Third, deed restrictions or other controls on how senior housing costs will get managed over time. And fourth, quantified estimates of senior demands for various housing formats. And then lastly on the agenda, discussion of possible actions to be taken between now and the annual town meeting. And I would just cite a personal issue that I have, which is the fact that I live one house over through the Hinckley property. There's the Hinckley property, then there's my neighbor, and then there's my house. And so I am ethically not permitted to talk about Hinckley and Lot 3 because of my closeness to them. I had a discussion with the State Ethics Commission about that and decided that I just can't talk about that as a selectman. I can talk about them personally. So, opening discussion of the situation regarding the development of senior housing in town to include highlights of current plans and discussions of longer range possibilities. Anybody have anything that they want to start with?
I'll just at least kick this conversation off now so they have more information than anybody else, just get it started. I wasn't able to attend the session that Tony ran a month or so ago now, but I did watch the video. And my impression of some of the comments that came out of that is that most people were aware of the plans for the Hinckley property, but were not particularly aware of some of the other plans. They're not as well developed or specific perhaps as the Hinckley property is, but I got the impression that some people felt like that was about the only thing that was in the hopper. And having spent time with the State Hospital Master Planning Committee, I was aware that there were more plans under development than just that. So the reason that first items on the agenda was to make sure that we could kind of level set what some of the thinking is around the state hospital property. Because Steve Nolan's here, he may want to comment on some of this. Tony's got his hands up, and Mike Marcucci, there may be some things tied into the Affordable Housing Trust you may want to comment on, so.
I just want to bring up the point that the section
So,
we have.
Tony, before you go forward, let me just ask the TV people, is it important that anybody asking questions ask it into a microphone?
No, it's a shotgun mic, so it's for the whole room.
Okay, thanks.
The meeting that we did on October 26th, that the part of it was what was happening at the state hospital. And we had two drawings, two schemes of what's happening at the state hospital. And I purposely said, okay, these are the sections where they're talking about senior housing. I said, I don't know what it means. I think it means assisted living. That's all it says. And that's all that was available on the website. We asked somebody from the planning committee to come to the meeting. They didn't. So, I mean, I did cover it for the best of the information we had. It was not an oversight.
So maybe, Steve, it would be a good thing if you could maybe start by explaining to people about the housing for different groups at the state hospital that are in the plans at the moment.
Sure.
Thank you.
So our plan is not final yet, so everything I say is still tentative. We have several components of housing designated specifically for seniors. We have been charged with looking at Hinkley property on lot 3 in addition to the core campus. Hinkley property, as you already know, we have scheduled for something like 15 or so single-family housing devoted to seniors. Lot 3, our plan is to do a 42-unit around that rental affordable for seniors. That would be true affordable as opposed to the 16 units which we're trying to keep at moderate prices. They would not be 40B eligible. The 42 units on lot 3 would be 40B eligible. Then up at the core campus, we have the area on the southeast, which some people refer to the cottages, so they're the smaller buildings on the right-hand side of the property, where we're anticipating that area will be devoted to senior housing as well, potentially some single, some duplex, and triplex units. That's not been resolved yet, but that area would be designated for that use. And in the core campus itself, we have a number of buildings on the right-hand side, on the water tower side, that would be intended for a CCRC type facility, some independent units and perhaps some assisted living units. It's a little bit up in the air because that would depend a little bit on the market response on that side of the campus. So those are the basic components.
Yes.
I suspect not everybody knows what CCRC is.
Continuing Care Retirement Community.
Right.
In different iterations, it's basically a buy-in, usually for some sort of endowment buy-in. You can structure them differently. At Carlton Willard in Bedford, the buy-in is a low number, but you get less back at the back end. Your state may not get anything back at the end. The other end of the spectrum is the one that I was involved with. LaSalle Village has high buy-ins. Your state gets 90% of the money back when you leave, when you die.
Was the stand wrong?
Continuing Care Retirement Community. And they have different plans as well. When you buy in at LaSalle Village, they agree contractually to care for you until you die, whether it's in your apartment or in the nursing home. Fox Hill doesn't have that. They don't have the lifetime guarantee. If you need a nursing home, you're on your own. You have to go find your nursing home and you have to sell your unit. So there are different ways of doing it and different ways of buying in. But they're generally more expensive than other forms of housing.
Excuse me, I'm sorry, that wasn't clear. The best I heard was that it's going to be a mix of assisted living, then some over 55 living, and then some 40B apartments. Is that correct? So that those three are going to all be out of the state hospital. It's not either or. You're proposing to do all three.
We're proposing to do all three, but the low-income rental was at lot 3, which is here, as opposed to the core campus.
So then, understood correctly, was going to be cottages and some duplexes.
Some single family, some duplex, maybe some private.
So those two options, duplex or single family. Okay, so is this been decided, or is this, was there a discussion, or?
Well, it's, we're pretty far down in our planning, although the plan's still going to be completed next Wednesday. We have a meeting where we're presenting.
Could you speak up, please? We can't hear you a little back here.
Next Wednesday, our meetings are all open to the public, so you're welcome to come. They're usually held at the DPW building. This meeting, actually, next Wednesday will be at the Public Safety Building. But our consultants are going to bring a plan that will spell out the range of units and the location. So we're pretty far down the road at this point. We're going to roll out a public process to describe the plan that we ended up at, but we've largely made most of the decisions going into the plan, subject to some fine tuning.
So you have an estimate, can you share with us for the over 55, how many units there are?
I don't know exactly. I would say, and there's 16 units here on Hinckley. Up there, the range is probably something like 24 to 30 would be my guess.
Is it in for assisted living, it would be?
I don't remember the exact counts, but somewhere in the 80 to 100 range for that
So that's
CCRC.
larger.
It's considerably larger. There's a big economy of scale in those type of facilities because if you're providing nursing care, assisted living care, then you need a certain number of units to make that economic. And independent living, as Pete said, there's usually a progression between them. So there's usually most independent living, some assisted, and then
So
some
the
nursing care.
cottage, I take that to be one floor living?
Not necessarily. I mean, we haven't really gotten into the details. We're not designing those units. We're dictating what the mix might be, but it'll be somewhat up to the developer. We're not the
Okay,
developers.
well, the definition of cottage, it doesn't imply it's small.
But what I said was this, known as the cottage area, because now it's developed with cottages. It's not that we're proposing cottages per se. We're proposing single-family duplexes and perhaps
Okay,
triplexes.
but you
depending.
can't tell us if they're one floor living.
I don't know. We haven't gotten that level of detail.
Have you been approached by anybody outside developer as yet, even though these plans are not yet before developed? Has anybody approached?
We actually met with, we had organized a roundtable with developers ourselves to get input from the development community. So yes, we have.
So I'm curious on how you arrive at the appropriate quote-unquote number of units. Seems to me there's a lot of interest in such things, just judging by the size of the crowd that's seated here. And the numbers you're giving me, like offhand, sound small. There's been we've done numerous surveys. I can't believe how many, I'm sure you know. I want to know if that survey's been done and considered accurate in terms of the interest from the community, because this has been a long-standing issue and a chance to correct a serious problem we have. I would think that we would have every kind of number available to us as to what's going to happen, judging the interest of this town.
Well, we've attempted to have a community that is not devoted to one particular use. I mean, there is a lot of interest in senior housing, but there's interest in other types of housing, other types of uses, including performing arts and other things, as well as commercial. So we have not intended that to be a senior enclave. That was not our view of things. I mean, there may be more demand, but we didn't view our mission as meeting the entire demand for senior housing at the state hospital.
I find that likely.
It's a town decision. It'll be the decision of the annual town meeting or a special town meeting that decides whether we do this or not.
I'm sorry, I guess I'm getting old. I can't hear you. Speaking of the
Sure, thank you. I said it's going to go to a special town meeting. The residents are going to make the decision about whether this is what they want or not.
Of course. Are you referring to a future or proposed town meeting or one that we have?
There has been a tentative special town meeting that's been penciled in March at this point to talk about it. But, this is all, it's a dynamic, fluid situation. The committee's working really hard to hit that date, but, it's not set in stone at this point.
There are a number of ways to slice this. It's an issue because we have a terrific opportunity, we all know, with the amount of land that we have and the things that are proposed. I'm just suggesting because of and I know we've done exhaustive research with the towns and people offering up suggestions like open space and the things you're talking about. But I just point out that this particular project strikes a nerve with me. Watching the towns surrounding us, putting things up left and right, and finding after 40 years of living here, not once, I feel, now that I'm a senior, I feel a little bit slighted by the fact that despite what's happened at the hospital, that this issue really hasn't come forward in any kind of way that would satisfy me. And we see seniors leaving town, and I'm sure I speak for some of the seniors here. We have poured a lot of money into taxes to support our schools, and now that our kids are gone, we're still doing it, and we're doing it to keep good schools and a town that's worthy of living in. And I'm here today because somehow or another, I don't feel like we've done comprehensive work on what this community seniors deserve. That's my point.
Thank you so much. Jerry, why don't you use the microphone? Bill's going to become our microphone person, I guess. Thank you, Bill.
One quick question. You said the meeting for March is not etched in stone. Why not? Why can't we get a definite date for a meeting, and why can't we have a timeline as when we can actually see some construction? Because we're not getting any younger. And
I think there is a specific date, Jerry. It's just that there are certain things in terms of hearings on the zoning changes that are being proposed. There are certain requirements that have to happen before that, and so that if everybody hits the marks, then we'll have that town meeting.
well, because we had talked, last summer we were saying, well, there will be a special town meeting will be in September, and we heard, well, maybe November, and we said maybe January. Now you're saying March. It just keeps getting pushed off and off and off.
It has.
And we're not getting any younger.
Right. It's an incredibly complicated process. It is. And this committee has been working incredibly hard, believe me. I've watched them.
So can I speak to, just on the, in addition to being on the Board of Selectmen, I'm also the chairman of the Affordable Housing Trust in Medfield. And so let me just supplement some of this, because I think we can provide some timing clarity on at least a couple pieces of this, putting aside the overall core campus project of the state hospital. We have been working towards, with respect to the Hinckley proposal, I think Gus and I, as the non-recused selectmen on the issue, are in agreement that we are supportive of the proposal for the Hinckley property that the hospital committee has developed. So for 16 single-family units on the Hinckley property out here. Putting aside the timing of the special town meeting, whether the special town meeting happens in March or not, there will be an article on the annual town meeting the last Monday in April with respect to the Hinckley project. And so our consultant, who has been retained by the Affordable Housing Trust, has been met this past week with the consultant who was retained by the hospital committee to get together to work out the details of this particular proposal. Because of state and federal regulation, housing discrimination rules, and the like, this is a heavily regulated process. And so we have to make sure we develop a proposal that will be consistent with the objectives that have been identified by the hospital committee and by the Senior Housing Study Committee, and that will ultimately be successful both legally, financially, and otherwise. We're going to do it. So that project will be voted on at the town meeting in April. It involves the disposition of land and the sale of town land. Even if the special town meeting happens in March, that will be a town meeting on the overall plan. The specifics around this land, one way or the other, is going to be on the warrant for April. The exact details of it, we just have to sort it out. We think there may be a way to do this so that it would qualify as a 40B project, would not require to be rezoned, and would have what would be the market portion of the 16 units, would not truly be a market portion, right? It would not be the top dollar that you could get for the units. It would be higher than what the state regulations would qualify as affordable. But it would not be truly market in the sense that it wouldn't be, because typically in a 40B project, the developer tries to maximize the prices on the 75% of the units to make up for the loss or the lower profit the developer gets on the affordable units. Here, because the town would be providing a subsidy in the form of the land, it would be possible economically to keep the prices of those market units lower. And that's what we're striving towards, and that's what we're working towards putting on the ballot in April, putting on the town meeting in April, all right? So to your question, Jerry, that issue as to the Hinckley property, that will be voted on this year. And that, assuming we can work out the details and come up with a project that would pass muster legally, that we think would be viable and a developer would be interested in developing, right? I mean, because I'm not aware of many towns that have themselves, just the town government, built senior housing. And most of the developments you see going up in other towns, it's private developers that are building those projects. And the issue, the economic issue we have in Medfield is that, you know, our land prices here are higher than land prices in Norfolk. And so what we're trying to do with the proposal on the Hinckley property is to eliminate that piece of it. And we think developers can do this profitably. Developer could do this development profitably with the lower land acquisition costs, assuming the town meeting votes in favor of that. So for that particular piece of it, that's going to go ahead in 2018. Second piece of this that the Affordable Housing Trust has worked on is the expansion of Tilden Village, which has been a part of the town's housing production plan since it was first drafted. The trust appropriated money this past fall to help the Medfield Housing Authority complete its negotiations and work with the developer who's going to build the expansion of Tilden Village. In addition, as you know, you probably know, we have been in the process of developing several what are called LIP projects, LIP, Local Initiative Program projects. And these are sometimes colloquially referred to as friendly 40B projects, where the town works with the developer to put forward a proposal that is acceptable to the town, that would qualify under the 40B law. And under our housing production plan, if we can generate 21 of these units per year, we remain generally exempt from the overall 40B law. So in the process of developing these LIPs, which so far, it won't exclusively be this, so far have been small apartment buildings, we have tried to make sure in those apartment buildings, for seniors who might be interested in rentals and might be interested in non-capital S, capital H senior housing, so housing that is appropriate for seniors but not specially designated for seniors, that there are things like first floor units in these apartments. So in a three-floor apartment complex, to make sure there were, you know, one-bedroom units on the first floor. So we've been working on one of those particular projects that we're going to vote on next week. And one of the requests we made of the developer in that process was to make sure that when he put it together, some of the one-bedroom units were on the first floor, right? Because he has 3 stories, to make sure there's a mix. And again, it's not exclusively set aside for seniors, but it may be of interest to seniors. So just in terms of what we're working on now, I mean, that kind of summarizes the current things that are moving forward. In the housing production plan and in our go forward, in addition to the proposal that the hospital committee has put forward with respect to lot 3, which is 42 rental units for senior housing, we are also mindful of the need for additional senior housing developments in town. And so as we look to meet that 21 unit per year count, we are encouraging developers who are coming forward to keep the possibility of senior developments in mind. And so that is part of the overall plan. We're not trying to do any one thing with respect to the housing production plan, but we're trying to do a little bit of different things that we need. And one of those things that we need in town is more suitable housing for seniors. And so, again, I can't promise you, Jerry, or anyone that this is happening this year, that I can give you the date when we're gonna break ground and you're gonna start seeing cement poured. But that's kind of what's on the deck for the next year or so. And as we look at it each year, we're gonna be looking for this kind of mix of projects, which includes senior housing. And with respect to the Lot 3 proposal, depending on, unlike the rest of the hospital project, I don't know what Gus and I are gonna conclude with respect to Lot 3. This is an extended discussion between the two of us at all of our meetings, and we don't know where that's gonna land. If ultimately the town decides to go ahead with the senior housing piece of that, that's another one that can move quickly on Lot 3, because if it were done as a 40B comprehensive permit, you would not need as additional zoning changes, you would not need to go through that process, which is more cumbersome. You would just have to go through a land disposition process, and obviously there's nothing there right now. So that's kind of a general overview from the Affordable Housing Trust side of things of the projects that are in the hopper right now to be developed within, let's say, the next year.
Mike, why don't you identify that project you were talking about with the first floor apartment?
Sure, so that project that we're discussing next week, we've already discussed it once, is at 90 North Meadows Road, next to the Goddard School, the corner of West
Sit
Street.
in on the side of the parking lot at the Goddard School. Yes, Jerry, again?
The 16 or so units you're talking about on the Hinckley property, how many of those are going to be 40B?
Well, it depends on it. So 4 of them, if we're able to work it out with the current thinking, right? And this may change depending on, we may not be able to have any. So ideally, we would be able to do it without losing ground versus 40B. So if we did it that way, 4 of them would be affordable. You'd have to meet the state affordable housing standard. 12 of them would be, I call quasi-market rate. I mean, we would set, and that we'd have to develop sort of what the income and asset test would be for that. Because we don't, the goal would not be to just create 12 new purely market rate houses that themselves could be priced out of the segment of the senior population that this project is targeted towards. And so you've got to develop a market proposal or a quasi-market rate proposal, decide what those income and asset restrictions are going to be. We're likely going to want to have some sort of resale restriction on it, because if this is the purpose of this project, when the house is sold, we don't then want it to become a pure market rate house either, right? Because then you've helped sort of one generation of people living in those houses, but then you've priced out the next generation. So the idea would be to create a stable number of units that would be pitched at this segment of the senior population that wants an ownership house, under $450,000 with a suitable layout for senior living.
All right.
And those details, the reason we don't have chapter and verse in the plan is we just got to work that out. Not a lot of towns have done this sort of thing. I mean, this is not entirely a unicorn, but it's an unusual thing we're trying to do. And that's why with our experts on the housing front, we have to make sure we're doing it properly and we don't run into any problems when these things are built and suddenly it turns out, gee, we couldn't do it the way we did it.
All right, let's follow up on that. So we've got 12 units over here. I think most of it is the room, this room right now. We don't qualify for 40B, right? So on the other property, the Lot 3, thank you. Lot 3, you said those are going to be all 40B?
Well, that would be a traditional 40B project. So if it were 42 units, 25% of them would be affordable. And for sort of 25% of those units, you would have to meet the state income test. The other 75% would be market rate. It would be whatever rents the developer of that development sent to that. But essentially, whatever the market is for the types of units that are developed, 75% of them would be market rate units.
This one, I just.
All right.
Can I ask a question?
Go ahead.
So the Hinckley property, with the 16 units, would there be any preference for Medfield residents for those?
We are going to do our best to make the answer to that be yes. And again, this is another area where federal and state housing laws come into play, and there are limits on our ability to do that. So for example, in some of the 40B projects, and just using as an example, this is a smaller scale, using as an example what we've done at 67 North Street. I assume most of you have seen that, the building that's kind of falling down. So in that, there are 8 total units in there. 2 of them are kind of traditional, are affordable, 6 of them are market rate. And we agreed with the developer that one of the 2 affordable units would be set aside for a Medfield resident. With respect to the 12 market rate units at Hinckley, we are hopeful that we can put whatever sort of residency requirements we want on those, because we're not trying to qualify under any of the state or federal affordable housing guidelines for those 12 units. And so if we work it correctly, we are hopeful, and again, I can't make a promise now because the devil is always in the details, that of those 12 units, that there would be a preference for Medfield residents. Exactly how that worked out would depend in part on who the developer is who ultimately buys that property to develop that. But since it is town land that we would be selling, and the restrictions and limitations we would be putting on it, and Sarah, if I say anything completely wrong, just throw something at me. The restrictions we'd be putting on it would really be in our capacity as the landowner and the seller, and not really in our capacity as a governmental unit. So it would be almost a deed restriction in the sale, and there's greater flexibility when it is your property being sold to put downstream deed restrictions on that property than in our regulatory or lawmaking capacity. So I'm cautiously optimistic we'll be able to figure it out and set that aside for Medfield residents so that the subsidy the town is providing in the form of the cheaper land benefits the residents of the town.
That same factor applies up at the state hospital too, because we own it.
I'd like to respond to some of these questions about the surveys that were done. And we did one in the seniors housing study. I don't know if anybody read it, but the 86% of the respondents, or 36%, wanted to move into a condominium. And we equated that. I did some rough demand interpretation based on the numbers, and it came out like 160 units of condominiums would be required to meet the need. Single-family homes, 141, independent living is about 80. So these are big numbers. What we're talking about at the Hinckley property is a drop in the bucket. You get 15 units, you're going to take out 5, you get 11. How many people in this room? I mean, you're going to, and I think there's 2 things. One of them is you need a large project. It's not going to happen on Hinckley. It's going to happen at the state hospital, and that's where the land is. And that's where we need a larger project that focuses on senior housing. The other issue is, on any of these projects, if you want to get the price down to $3 to $450,000, $3 to $500,000 in Medfield, the price of the land has to come out of the equation, which means the town has to donate the land to the project, not sell it as a discount, but make it work so that you get prices that are in the $3 to $500,000 price range, and that are predominantly single level, first floor masters, whatever, no stairs, handicapped accessible. All these things have to be factored into the kind of housing you're going to develop. And if you start going in, well, we want a market rate, we want this, it's not going to help Medfield seniors. The kind of housing you're going to come up with is going to be like Hospital Road, you know, $600,000, $800,000. It doesn't work. The state hospital is the place where the action has to take place, and the price of the land has to come out of the equation. Or you're never going to get stuff that can take care of us. We're going to be moving to Norfolk.
I agree with a lot that's been said. I'd just like to point out that as much as Medfield seniors deserve some recognition for their contributing to town.
Put it up to your mouth.
Put it to my mouth? Okay.
Closer.
I just want to point out that we're all, very fond of the town, care about the town, what happens to the town, and we contribute to the town. As seniors, we pay taxes. We do not use your school system. We are a good investment. You've got to know that. And you're talking a lot about 401B, and I'm going to tell you, 40B, I'm all for it. But someone else pointed out, the seniors aren't necessarily looking for 40B. But as Tony said, there was a lot there that was interested in condominiums. That the developers should be interested in too, because it's worth their time and effort, and they will make the money. We don't need just first floor. There's nothing wrong with an elevator, and it's affordable. And and also a very large growing population. We are a marketplace with folks. And we're good citizens, and we contribute, and we want to be thought of in that light, not as a charity. That's something that we can continue to contribute to this town. Thank you.
like to make a couple of comments on what's been talked about the past 15 or 20 minutes. One piece, I don't want to open up the can of worms. Anybody with tomatoes can throw them if you don't like them. But I want to make one thing clear, given that Mike piqued your curiosity about what it is that he and I are debating. For the record, right now, my position on lot number 3 is it should be commercially developed. And there's a number of reasons for that. And I'll be happy to talk with people offline on that one. But for the one that is particularly relevant to the...
Or they can go on YouTube and watch about 6 hours. Of
if you want the full details, you only have to watch about 5 selectmen's meetings. And there'll probably be a few more that you can do that. But I want to come back just very briefly to give one reason. You raised the issue of the cost of living here for seniors. I think all of you have probably at some point in time raised the issue of the cost of living here for seniors. There's only a few ways that we're going to drive down the cost of living here. One of them is through diversification of the tax base, and that is squarely my number one reason why I have that position on lot number 3. There are more reasons, but that's one. I'll be happy to go longer, but I don't want to divert us off on that. What I want to talk about is what I don't think I fully understand about what it is the entire group of seniors in town really wants. The first point I'll make, and I'm going to go to the senior study report. One piece of information that was in that report that caught my attention was that 55% of seniors said they wanted to be downtown or close to downtown. And so I'm trying to understand how to reconcile that preference with all the housing that's being planned not really being downtown, except for perhaps Tilden Village, and what would be right. The second piece that's not clear to me is the issue I think you just brought up, which is getting a good handle on the economic segments that the seniors are in. When the park went in, I understand there are a number of seniors who qualified for 40B who went to the park. So there's some number of seniors in town where all of our 40B projects, which collectively will be adding another 150 units in town, for some seniors that may be a good option. There's the level that I think Mike is talking about. Above that may be some form of not 40B housing, but a next level up in terms of economic qualification. We don't know how many seniors fit in that. And then there's all the rest of the seniors who actually don't need any sort of government subsidized property, but do need a market option, whether we get to that market option through somehow or other donating land, or whether we have a format that gets us to market rates. And that market option, as I would understand it, is a price that ranges somewhere between $300,000 and $450,000. So the issue that I wrestle with and how to think about this is, all right, how many units over what amount of time? Because this is going to be phased in over time, across what economic levels and with what formats? Because there's a good chance, if we're talking about trying to put things down and downtown, above and beyond anything that would happen in Tilden Village, I think there's a better chance that that is going to be an apartment type of a format, just because of the concentration down there, than kind of a standalone like we're talking about on the Hinckley property. So the point, and then the one last question, I think I talked to an awful lot of seniors who are immediately talking about buying a unit. I'm not sure if you're in your 70s or go up as high as you want. I don't know why you want to take all the equity out of a house that you sell and take some portion of that equity and put it into a lower price unit. Incidentally, getting into a lower price unit that you buy is a way to lower the cost of taxes here. So that's another strategy for driving your cost of living here down. But perhaps, if we had the right kind of attractive housing, particularly I'm thinking apartments more likely, but not necessarily, the right type of rental housing, not 40B, not anything, a rental option where you could keep all your equity. And I've heard a lot of people say, no, we don't want to pay rent. Before you say that, think about the market rates for rent here in Medfield. I don't think I've heard anything more than $3,000 a month. Think about the nearly $1,000 a month some of you perhaps are paying, or $800 a month some of you are paying for real estate taxes. Think about if you had $400,000 in equity that you pulled out of a house that you sold, and I don't know, I'm guessing most of you would have houses sold off, and you could probably sell them for at least $400,000. Think of what $400,000 of equity invested that you get to keep gives you before you sit there and just write off the possibility of a rental, if the rental is in an attractive place that you'd enjoy. We have the property at the state hospital that would allow you to sit there and walk along the Charles River, if you're physically in good enough shape, to walk along the Charles River, to have views in all 4 directions. If, in fact, we had apartments that we could rent, they'd be market rent, but they would be, before you write it off, go through the numbers, because I think there's an opportunity there. What I'm saying here is I'm not satisfied, I personally at least, really understand the configuration, and Tony's heard this from me, because when I gave him the feedback on the draft report, I said, you know, I sure would like this segmented out by how many units do we need, in what kind of a format, at what kind of an economic level, and in which locations, so that we have, instead of just trying to figure out how we can jam something in to appease people who don't have housing, we can start to think about what's the best way to be thoughtful about giving seniors the housing that actually would be something, aside from merely meeting the need, would you'd actually like it. It might take a little longer. I understand we got some near-term needs. I'm not trying to get in the way of the Hinckley property, and I'm delighted that there's interest in the state hospital campus. Steve and the hospital committee knows, because we need to crack the first egg on that omelet, and I would like to see that happen sooner rather than later.
And then just one point of clarification, Gus, on the park and 40B. One thing to remember about 40B developments, the park is unusual in that the way it was financed required all of the units to be affordable. So for the park, 100% of the residents have to qualify under the state and federal requirements because of the financing the developer unit. Most 40B rentals, 25% of the units are set aside as affordable. The other 75% have no income test and are market rate units. So when you're thinking about 40B, don't think about it only in terms of, well, I have to have some sort of income or asset requirement. For most of the projects and most of the developments, the market rate units are just market rate units. And it's only that set aside for affordable where you have to meet it. And the advantage of the 40B is that it enables us to build things that we otherwise might not be able to do so under the zoning laws and make it attractive to a developer to do so. And that's what we're trying to do with the LIP projects. And so don't discount that as a strategy. It enables you to move a little bit quicker than you otherwise could, because you don't have to go through the same zoning change process, which could have all sorts of concerns for other people down the line, because once you've made those changes, your ability to control exactly the kind of project that goes there is limited. And if you make the changes with the idea that you're going to have some sort of senior development, you know, there's a free market and somebody else buys the property, and even in an RFP issued by the town, you only have so much flexibility when it's going to an open RFP process, depending on how it's designed, not to sell it to the highest bidder. So I mean, it's 40B is a strategy to get us to where we're going, and don't discount it, even if you know you would not qualify for those tests.
Where are we going?
I think where we're going, as we've discussed, is to develop additional housing in the town that's appropriate for the town, additional senior housing that's appropriate for people in the town and beneficial to people in the town. And that's where we're going. We're going under our housing production plan to get to the point where we have 10% of our units as affordable in the town, and we're no longer subject to the law. And I think everyone recognizes that the way the market has developed in Medfield over the course of the last 40 years, this is not something that only became an issue or was an issue that was created by the government of the town of Medfield within the last couple of years. And this is an issue that has come about over the course of the past 40 years, right? And you can look back, for those of you who've been in town for a long period of time, there's plenty of decisions that could have been made in 1985 that could have headed off this problem if people in 1985 would think, well, gee, looking at demographic trends, 30 years from now, we're going to have this issue, let's get ahead of it and create these options. That didn't happen. And so now we're trying to course correct where we are right now, and I think there is a broad recognition of the need to correct by using the assets of the town to correct the market in that area and to give the town meeting and the people of the town a chance to weigh in on that proposal.
40B.
Excuse me?
Basically for 40B.
Not just 40B, no.
I have to tell you, it sounds like it, and I have to tell you, I really am for it. But I think that when you say where we're going, I think that's the right thing to say too, is what's best for the town. it's like you're pushing 40B for the seniors, and you're telling us that rental might be better than we think. But I need to tell you back, we think quite clearly. We know the benefits of rental, and we know the benefits of buying a condominium. And 40B is great, and I want it for people that don't have homes in the city, that want to bring their kids to the good schools, as well as for seniors that need it. But I would love to know and hear you talk about what the strategy is for the town when it comes to developing properties, where you'd like to see it, what's its image, what do you want Medfield to be known for, or what is it that we want to accomplish? What's the tax money going to be used for? You mentioned rental. You're not getting tax money from us if we're renting. I assume you get it from the developer. But this is a very narrow picture that you're painting for us. I'd love to hear a big picture.
Well, I guess I would ask you a question to that, though. I mean, one of the reasons you talk about the 40B is because that's something, because to Jerry's question before, I mean, if you're talking about generally what the market's going to be, I mean, the market has told us in Medfield what developers in the market want to build in this town.
Okay.
So if you want to know what that is, there's an answer to that. It doesn't really answer the question that's being posed in this meeting, is how do we, just remember, there are about 3,000 seniors in Medfield.
Yeah, we hear that.
Right.
I hear clearly that you know what the developers want. How do the developers know what the town people want? Who speaks for them?
Well, I mean, ultimately you would by buying a house or not buying a house, right? I mean, we can't
Before that time.
right, but we can't, as the government, we can't dictate to private developers what to build beyond land that we don't
That's why we're here
own.
tonight, is to be a voice as to what the developers say they want to do, and what we, as the purchasers, say we want.
Isn't there leverage with the ownership of the state hospital property? I mean, just to your comment about you can't tell developers what to do, but isn't there, I mean, we spent the money on that property, and isn't there not, the opportunity to, quote, dictate, unquote, to developers what we want there? And I think part of the frustration, too, is that I know there's been a lot of good work and a lot of good plans, possible scenarios up at the hospital, but one of the frustrations I have is I don't feel as if the, all right, I'm sorry.
Mr. Chairman, could you ask people before they speak to identify themselves?
Yes.
Sure, Lee Treadway, Kenny Road. So as I was trying to comment, and I'm sorry if I was not heard, is that it seems to me we have leverage because we own the town property. And what I don't sense, despite all the good work, is that the senior housing issue is at the top of the priority list. And that it's a piece of the puzzle, but it's not the main piece of the puzzle. And it's a little frustrating, and I mean, I've had these discussions over a glass of wine with some of the people in this room, where taxes, I mean, our taxes have gone up 30% over the last 5 years. And taxes continue to rise, and yet if we sell our house, and if you happen to be, say, below the median price of the house in Medfield, and you sell below that price, there's nowhere to go with that money in Medfield. And I think that's what, very anecdotally, that's what I understand to be the concern for a lot of people in the senior community.
So I think that the answer to some of that is that yes, in the land that the town owns, we have a lot more say in what happens. What we have learned, and that's the reason that we bought the state hospital, I think, because people wanted that sort of control. So we have that control, and what we've learned is that the process of figuring out what to do is complicated. It has taken us, the hospital closed in 2003, we bought it several years later. It's a hard, arduous process to get a municipality to do these sorts of developments. And we're not even the developer, we're just trying to come up with the ideas of what we want the developers to do for us. So that municipalities are not fleet of foot. They're not nimble the way private developers are. So that it's a long slog to get to the development of the state hospital. We're getting very close, and I think that that's going to happen in the next year. That we'll be rolling on that. So that we have a proposal for the state hospital that'll be open for discussion. The residents will make the decision on that. It requires a 2/3 vote of the town meeting to go forward with that. So we'll see whether that's what people want or not. Most of the housing in Medfield is built because there's a market for it. And most of the market has been single-family homes. We're just almost uniformly single-family homes. My goal has been to try to figure out how to add diversity to the housing in terms of other options, so that there are not only single-family home options for people that want something different. And I think that in hindsight, I think the park has worked out okay because it provides an option, and clearly it's full, so that there are enough people that want to live there. I think any of these different sorts of housing that we build provides another option and will be a good thing for the town. When I was a kid, your choice was you live in your single-family home or you go to the nursing home. Now we've got a whole range of options for us as we get older in terms of assisted living or just different varieties of things that we can choose to live in. So that I think more choice is my goal for the town, so that everybody, and the reality is that the town is not the builder, they're not the developer, and so we can't build a house for every resident in town. We can try to build some things, especially on lands where the town has an interest or has some ability to affect the decision. In most cases, when the private developer comes along and owns the land, they are telling us what they want to do. And we can, our zoning either allows it or it doesn't. If it's a 40B project, we have some sort of say in it, like we've had with these recent LIPs, where we can say, yes, we think that's a good one at that site. No, we don't think it's a good one for that site. So I think the variety is the thing that we want to try to establish for the town, just so people have more choices. And it's not going to be perfect. I mean, we're not going to have a choice for every person, clearly. Jack Wolf.
Pete, thanks very much. And let me thank Tony and Gus for what I thought was a useful conversation. Because it seems to me, before we think about what we want to do, we need to define the need in the town. How many people want a home? How many want to rent? By socioeconomic tranche, do we want to price them at 300, 400, 500? Do we want housing today? Do we want it 3 years from now? Do we want it 5 years from now? And if so, in what amounts? So I think we can't solve the problem in this room of how to do it. But can we make a good start on trying to identify what we need to do? And what we need to do is the quantity of housing over time by type. And is there a way that we could help through the town to fund a really good, validated and accurate survey of what the housing needs are? And from those housing needs, we can then work on the solutions. So let me just throw that out on the table, because until we define the need, in my view anyway, we cannot define the solution.
So Jack, my neighbor had a history of employment in market research, and I asked him that question, and he told me that you can do a survey. I think it's as low as 300 or 400 people is all that's required for the town of Medfield to get to a statistically significant result as to what people want. I think that might be a very good thing to do. I've certainly thought about it. That's why I was talking to my neighbor about it.
Honestly, for relatively small money, probably something in the neighborhood of $20,000, my sense is we could survey a couple of thousand seniors in this town and survey them in a way that would be validated and generally reasonably accurate.
Just, I would add, in case there's anybody, and first off, thanks, Jack, for the thoughts, and I think you reinforced the point I was trying to make earlier in a more concrete way. But for those here in the room who might have said, that sounds an awful lot like we've got another excuse to wait another year or two to do anything, the one point I would make is I'm looking at it, and I actually think as we probably all are looking at it, there's a reason why the Hinckley property development makes sense to me. It's like, I don't know whether we got the right numbers, but I'm pretty sure that that is a really good starting test to see how fast that gets absorbed. I think if we in fact can put together some development for near-term development up at the state hospital property, if seniors don't want what gets built there, I have a funny feeling that's got to be some of the most gorgeous property we have in town. There will be people who will want it, and if we do it with an eye toward creating something that would be attractive to seniors, that will be another test on the demand while we're getting a more objective and a more precise estimate of the total demand. I want to make one plug here, and I don't know if your comment was pointed in this direction about where is the town trying to go. The Selectmen have just issued or have just settled on a draft set of town goals, which we want to send out to the public. This is not the Selectmen's goals, it's not even the town administration's goals. It's intended to be a short statement of what the aspirations or the overarching priorities for the town will be. And we want public feedback, so it's a draft. And we'd like to, so to answer the question, if you were asking in the broadest sense about where are we going, that's an opportunity to do that. One point is one of the specific long-term goals we put in there, totally arbitrary, is we said to build 120 units of senior housing by, I don't know, somewhere like 2020 or 2022. So there's no validity to that number. It's just it was a bigger number than what we had, and it was bigger than what we kind of knew we were going to be doing. So when that comes out, if you do have comments, we sure would appreciate the feedback.
I'd just like to make one more. I think the gentleman is absolutely correct.
Use the mic.
I don't think I need the mic. I've got a strong voice.
No, you don't.
Okay, can you hear me? I think that you... What? Speak into it? Oh, okay. But it's obviously the idea of the survey is a great idea. I know we did one already, and it's been a small one. But also, I don't know if you've done this or what the thoughts are, but other towns that are similar to us, have we met with them, talked to them about what they've done in terms of senior living, such as Needham, Sherburne, towns that are close by, Walpole. I think we could learn a lot from their experience. I just wanted to add that.
Tony Santori, just make a couple of comments. I applaud your focus on Lot 3 and Lot 1 to get something started and done. I might suggest that you consider detaching these two parcels from the state hospital project and expedite something, get something going, and in a timely manner. I think that should be given serious consideration. I think the other thing that's troubling for seniors is the 40B proposal that comes from the state. It isn't the town government that's foisting this on us, it's the state government saying, you guys in the suburbs are going to take some low-income people and you're going to provide housing for them and you're going to cut the price down. I think the whole thing is kind of warped and I really don't agree with it. And I think some of the stuff that we're hearing tonight says that maybe we should be talking about 40S. I mentioned this 2 years ago. 40S housing for seniors. We're a group of people that are underserved. We're in the town. We pay taxes. We're like, and as someone has said, we're not at the first row. We're down in the bottom someplace. You come after somebody else and the developer, etc. Some of you may be aware of what's happening out on Hospital Road, the Chapel Hill Estates. These units are going for $900,000. And they're up and down. They have first floor masters, but they have a very small common room on the first floor. But that's what we're getting. Same thing with Glover. And that's the kind of stuff that sticks on my craw. I see that kind of stuff being built. And the other thing is, you guys probably are aware that there's a assisted living development going on right around the corner from us in Millis. I mean, they're broken ground. I see they're grading. They're probably going to be doing foundations before Christmas. And they're going to be up and going. And we're going to be farming around with the state hospital and planning and listening to people about open space and walking their dogs and planning and all the red stuff, which to seniors is important. But I think we have a higher need. And we wish that the town would recognize it.
So Tony, your reference 40S, I defer to the attorneys in the front row, but I think 40S is the part of the statute that pertains to getting extra money for your schools. I think you're probably referring to 40R, maybe, which is the another version of 40B to get higher density, and they are talking about 40R zoning at the hospital.
I think Tony might be suggesting a new addition to the chapter.
Senior, 40 senior. All right. So I mean, the other issues that come up in this is the land costs in Medfield are very high, and we also have very few sites. Millis has tons more sites than we do, so that they're getting the development now. It's, you know, we learned from LCB that it's very hard to put an assisted living site into Medfield at the moment. The Metropolitan Area Planning Commission came out about 10 years ago and told us that we're basically built out as a town, that we don't have much buildable land anymore. It's only when these big parcels turn over or something happens, like at the state hospital, where land really becomes available. I just wanted to comment on the issue of making things affordable. Clearly, in a real estate development situation, the land is a big part of the cost, and the way that you can get the land cost per unit down is by increasing the density. So that, I mean, we all want to think maybe in terms of living in these single-family homes that historically we're used to home ownership, so we think that they should be something that we would like to own maybe. But I think that if we put them closer together, we can obviously get more in a given area of land, which could make them more affordable because the cost can be less. And I would encourage people to think about rental over ownership, because I think that's a very viable way. I think it gets you to a solution. It's an easier solution for the town to build rental than ownership.
So if I can respond, Tony, to one of your points on the separation of Lot 3 and Hinckley from the hospital planning process. This has been a subject of discussion since last summer, and the hospital committee members are starting to give me the stink eye again on this particular topic. I can see Lucille already is starting to look at me. I know that look. And so this came up over the summer, and we had an extended discussion about it, and a back and forth with the hospital committee, and we came to the conclusion that, the Board of Selectmen came to the conclusion that the best way to move quickly on Lot 3 in Hinckley was to leave it with the hospital committee for now, as of then, last summer. Where it stands right now, regardless of what happens with the core campus development, regardless of what happens with the special town meeting, I think Gus and I are in agreement that in 2018 we'll move ahead with Lot 3 in Hinckley one way or the other. And so if the hospital process continues beyond March or beyond June or whatever that is, and I think we have to give it the time that is needed to arrive at a plan that is in the overall best interest of the town, we can take the work that the hospital committee has done on Lot 3 in Hinckley and move those ahead separately. So while the planning process has remained with the Medfield State Hospital Master Planning Committee, the implementation can begin sooner than the implementation of the rest of the core campus development. And that was my reference earlier tonight to the idea that on the warrant for the annual town meeting this year, there will be an article on the Hinckley property. And that will be on the warrant regardless of what happens regardless of what happens to the rest of the hospital. With respect to Lot 3, the conclusion of Gus and I and of Mark Sorrell is that we already have authorization from the 2014 annual town meeting to move ahead with the development on Lot 3. And so, depending on what happens overall, depending on where Gus and I land on the exact process and what proposal we're going to put into an RFP, Lot 3 is also something that can go ahead to an RFP process in 2018. And that is both our plan, and I think it is a realistic plan for both of those pieces of property. As far as the larger development you're talking about at the core campus, that's going to have to get sorted out in that as part of that overall process. But at least with respect to those two parcels, you know, and as Gus noted, no promise that we're necessarily going to go ahead with what the hospital committee has proposed for the 42-unit 40B project in Lot 3. But with respect to both of those, they will not be temporarily tied any longer to the overall core campus planning process, which is obviously whatever complexity is there is in that part of the planning process and not in the Lot 3 planning process.
I just want to mention one other thing. We set up an affordable housing trust. We put $1 million into the trust. I don't know why we can't put town-owned land into the trust, so that this can be used as part of a project. Say, okay, the town's got the land, we'll either donate it or we'll sell it at a fraction of the cost, so that we can get the kind of housing that seniors want. And I think it was kind of poo-pooed. We didn't want to have land go into the trust. We just wanted to put $1 million and then play games with that.
All right, let me respond just to your question. I don't know if there's a legal mark in a minute here since I'm done with hear from you, but there's probably, if there's no legal reason why we can't do it, then your suggestion is good. But I can tell you the way I would think about putting $1 million into the Affordable Housing Trust was not a cookie jar for people to try to grab, and putting land into the Affordable Housing Trust, in my mind, would not be a cookie jar to simply subsidize something to drive a cost down. I would expect if we do anything by way of town land, to donate town land, it would be for a development that would have some sort of a continuing town interest in terms of like the controlled costs that Mike has talked about. This would not, the thing I wouldn't want to see happen is that we just donate land, which has value, that we own, and then just have it go out into a development.
The price of land is going to make a big difference in what the price, the actual.
And I think that's what we're talking about, Tony, with all of these projects. The starting point is right. I mean, the starting point with any use of town land for one of these projects is the idea that the town land is going to be sold for much less than the market value, maybe for $1, right? I mean, that's where the subsidy is going to come from, as opposed to just sort of tax dollars directly being paid to a developer to build the kind of housing that we want. I mean, so I think we 100% agree with you when we talk about selling the land. If part of the project is going to be a non-market rate project that will serve the citizens of the town, then the way the town provides that subsidy is through a lower price for the sale of land. And that's what we're talking, when we talk about Hinckley, when that RFP goes out, and I don't think there'll be any expectation, at least from my end or anyone else's end, that we're gonna get any material amount of money for that land. I mean, you're basically saying, here's what we want built on this property, make a bid to build it. It would be great if, based on the parameters that are in the RFP, there's more than one developer interested and we get more than $1 for that piece of property. We'll have to follow the rules that are set down for the RFP process and the land disposition process. But I think we hear you loud and clear that if all we do is sell the land to the highest bidder, I agree with you, we are not going to get this particular slice of the population, this tranche, as Jack referred to it, served. Because for people who are indifferent to the cost, the market is already going to serve that part of the population, right? So we're sort of tranching off already folks who would be perfectly happy to move into a $1 million home with a first floor master bedroom, right? That's not what we're talking about. The town doesn't need to do anything for those folks, right? That's a chunk of our senior population, and it's already being served by the market. We're talking about the part of the population, I think we're all talking about the same segment of the population that is not served by the current market uses of these properties. I mean, plenty of developers they'd be falling all over themselves to build $1 million homes with first floor master bedrooms. The town doesn't really need to get involved in that type of project. So we are talking about a sale of land, whether it's done procedurally through a donation to the trust or just a sale of town land with restrictions at a much lower price point or at almost no price in order to facilitate this kind of development.
And I'll get you in a second, Jerry. And I would add to that I think that the town, if it's putting up its land, that it might want to make the decision as to whether it's in the town's interest to satisfy the housing for 16 people or maybe 32 people, and to make that call. That's going to be, it's the town's land, so they should have the decision on that. I don't know, Mark, whether you had something on the issue of putting land into the trust that you wanted to tell people about, and then we're going to go to Jerry.
That wasn't what I was going to respond to. There are issues, both legal and policy-wise, that have to be addressed. Control, decision-making, that sort of thing. No, my point was going to be that, incidentally, I'm Mark Sorrell, Medfield Town Council. I'm also the Franklin Town Attorney, and in Franklin we've done numerous dispositions of town land for a variety of purposes, including affordable housing. And so what you have to understand, ultimately, even though it may be town land is being offered, and therefore you have control over it, the ultimate control is, no, we're not going to let the land out because we're not satisfied with what we're getting from responses. So when you prepare an RFP, you have to do it with some understanding of what market conditions are and what kinds of responses you're going to get. We put RFPs out in Franklin and gotten on pieces of land that we thought were fairly desirable and not gotten responses because we were asking too much or the developers perceived that they couldn't make enough of a profit. So even with the state hospital land, you can't view that in a vacuum. Ultimately, you come up with a proposal with your consultants and all, but that's taking into account market realities, that there are developers out there that can respond and can make a profit, because frankly, that's all they care about, is making a profit. They really don't care about the citizens of Medfield, the community of Medfield, or anything other than the fact it's a economic-driven decision-making process.
Thanks, Mark. Jerry, go ahead.
Jerry Kazanjian. I'm glad to hear that the 2 lots we're talking about, you're gonna do something with them, whenever that happens. It's gonna happen in 2018. Great. Now, if the state hospital committee can't get their act together and we have to put it off again, then why can't we just say, let me give you an example. When the people wanted to put the assisted living place down by the Beak House, we had a meeting up at the Kingsbury Club for the seniors, some there. I said to the guy, I said, why don't you just build it up at the state hospital? You'd be a hero in the town because you start to be the first person there and you get something going. Because once something gets in there, something else will follow right away. So my point is, if you can do something.
What was his response?
He
Pardon me?
didn't want to
What
go.
was his response? No, I
He
don't want to go there.
no. I told him it was, I said, big mistake, I said. Anyway, my point is this. If the state hospital committee can't get their act together and puts us off again, then why don't we just get on the warrant that we want a chunk of land, we'll figure the size, for 120 units, condominium style land from the state hospital for seniors to be developed in 2018.
So I hear your frustration, Jerry.
All it takes is what, 25 signatures to get a warrant article?
I hear your frustration. We are a long ways along on a very complicated process, and we are going to get to the town meeting with that process, and we will have a chance to vote on the process that comes out of the committee.
And I will say,
If that doesn't happen, then, sir, then all bets are off and we can have another process. It's our land, we get to choose, but it's a long process to get to choosing.
and there's nothing stopping you from putting in whatever petition you want to put in for the warrant. I will say, from my perspective, the volunteers on the State Hospital Master Planning Committee do have their act together. The process has taken a long time, and I've noted many times the process has taken a long time. And I'm not going to say I just agree with every single thing they've done or how they've done it, but in general, they are doing their level best in the best interest of the town to come up with a plan that will work for everybody. Because one of the challenges they have is that in a town of 12,000 people and 8,500 registered voters, you can probably get 10 signatures for 150 different articles on what to do with different slices of that property. And one way to go about dealing with the property would be just say, well, let's get those 150 articles and everybody can have their plan for each slice of the property. What they're trying to do, and what has taken a long time, and what they've tried to take into account, is the fact that a lot of people have a lot of interest in different pieces of that. And so, this is obviously a meeting directed to senior housing, and so I think your proposal there, Jerry, would have great approval in this room. But even in our least attended town meeting, this would not be enough to carry a vote at that least attended town meeting for that article. And so I would say, we are going to see what happens over the next 6 months with respect to the hospital. We're going to see if we're going to have a special town meeting in March or at some point. And yeah, at some point we're going to have to evaluate, and under their charter they're going to have to come back to the Board of Selectmen for approval for whatever proposal. And we'll have to decide what it is we're putting before the special town meeting. So I'm not going to tell you not to exercise the rights that you have under the town charter and the U.S. Constitution to put a petition on the town meeting. But I will say that there is a strong effort being put forward by the committee, and I would say that their act is together, and I would not put it in their lap to say, well, you don't have your act together, and that's why we haven't voted on this.
So we're going to go first to Gus, and then to Lou, and then back to you.
And then this board isn't trying to speak on.
Oh, that's all right.
Oh, all right, we'll go back to you then, sorry.
I just wanted to kind of add to my endorsement to Mike's comment about the committee. I've attended probably at least 3/4 of the committee's meetings over the last 2 years, so I've put some time into watching it. This is a group of people that have worked very hard. I understand that we want a result. It's a very difficult result to get to, and we wish we had it. I certainly wish we had it 2 years ago so that we would start on this. But the complexity is not to be disregarded. I'd give you a suggestion to think about this. Based on the information, and I'm using some really round numbers, this is a $500 million real estate development project. $500 million, a $500 million project, basically being worked on by a bunch of very hard-working citizens who are being helped by contractors. But let's not get confused about the magnitude of this thing. With that much gasoline in the tank, you make the wrong decision and you make the wrong move. And incidentally, that $500 million, that's to put the buildings up. I hesitate to say what the infrastructure cost to the town is because that number's been moving around, but it's at least in the tens of millions of dollars range. I don't think it's over 100 million, but you can pick any number between 10 and 100, and you've got a number that it could reasonably be, and that's an added cost to the town unless we're smart about figuring out how to get the economics to make sense. So Jerry, I actually think my advice to you would, rather than trying to force that, my advice would be to go to the towns, go to the preferred scenario, figure out where the housing is planned for, and come in with a good proposal for how the seniors would really like to be in this chunk of it. Is there any way that we can, when we start to put definition into this project, that we could put this first, and we could, or up toward the front of the pile, and influence what it is to meet those needs? I'm guessing that the committee would actually welcome that kind of added specific thinking, because they have a tiger by the tail on this one. And I don't even yet know whether that tiger will be wrestled to the ground by March in a way that everybody's going to be able to make a good decision on it. It's tough. It's not because they're not trying.
So I just want to add my compliments to the committee too. They have worked very diligently, very hard. Next we're going to Lou Fellini in the Lou Fellini Hall, and then we'll be over to you.
Yeah, just a quick point. We're chasing our tails on housing. What the seniors are asking for is recognition. Right now, on every tax dollar we spend, we only get 27 cents of it. 73 cents goes to the school department. We're looking for some sort of relief, one way or the other, and recognition that we're seniors. And we do deserve something. We built this town, we built the education system in it, and we're getting slapped in the face by higher education. There's a $400,000 request, I guess, for a new high school or study, and it's just going up and up. And I think you three gentlemen have to sit down somewhere and stop this rise of taxes so that we can at least live in the town the rest of our lives. It'll take another 5 to 10 years to get housing for us in this town. I've already got my address planned up the street, and it's already paid for. So what I'm asking for is, let's get a little more tighter on the taxes, and so we don't have to pay them. Thank you.
Thank you. Bill, up at the front?
Yep.
Thank you. So taxes are a problem because the Constitution in Massachusetts requires that everybody pay the same amount. I know that Sudbury was looking to somehow give some sort of benefit to seniors who've been in town for a long time and try to reduce their property taxes. I know I'm interested in trying to see if we can do that.
Hi, my name is Patricia Treadway. I live on Kenny Road. And I would like to thank you, gentlemen, for coming here tonight. You have done an amazing amount of work, your time and your talent in researching this. And I appreciate that it's complicated, it's challenging, and the whole future of Medfield depends upon getting this right. So I wanted to thank you, and I agree. I'm sorry, I don't know your name, the gentleman on the right. Jeff. I absolutely agree with you about a apartments. I think, you know, some of us.
Put her up to that, please.
I think some of us could consider apartments. I think the developer did a great job with 67 North Street across from the post office. It presents such a nice appearance. I think it enhances the appearance of the downtown. And I understand he's going to be developing the property next to that. I think there really is a need for mixed housing in Medfield, apartments, condos, assisted living, continuing care, retirement communities. I think the whole future of the town depends upon doing these projects and getting them right. But thank you for all the time and effort you put into this.
So I just want to respond to Mr. Fellini's point briefly, and I think, and while I sympathize with him, the reality is that the only way to have really meaningful tax relief, more than just $1 or $2 here and there, is to provide houses with lower valuations. Because if you look at the overall budget of the town, if you look at what realistically you could cut, I mean, it's not like we can cut $10 million from the town budget without doing serious harm to the schools, the police, the fire, the roads, and everything else. I mean, I'm sure there's always areas you can be more efficient, there's always areas you can do better. On the school side, our per pupil costs are already, you know, in the bottom quarter in the state. The reality is when you have a town that's 95% residential, just providing the basic level of services is expensive. And unlike the federal government, we can't borrow and without paying for it. And unlike the state government, we can't pass those costs down to somebody else in the form of unfunded mandates and regulations. And so I think in a town that is primarily funded by residential property taxes, the best option we have to lower the tax burden on seniors is to try to provide more diversity of housing. Because other than around the margin, we just had the other night our tax classification hearing deciding whether there would be a split tax rate, whether there would be a different rate for residences and businesses. And we voted, as we do every year, to keep it as a single rate. And the reality was, if you had a split tax rate and a higher tax rate on the businesses in town, you'd have a huge increase to the businesses and very, very modest decreases to the residences. And so the reality is there's no magic way to wring substantial tax relief out of our operating budget. I mean, we can certainly decide not to do one thing or not another. You can change it around the margins, but you can't really change it in a material way without getting the stuff that is really necessary and needed and important. It's just the reality of local finance. And so to Gus's point, one of the things we'd like to do, one of the town goals that we've identified, is a further diversification of the tax base to try to have a larger percentage of taxes paid by commercial enterprises by encouraging business. Now, we're never going to be Westwood. It's never going to be 30%. We don't have a highway coming through. We don't want a highway coming through. But given the math, given the fact that we're 95% residential, the best option for lowering taxes is to have more housing with lower valuations.
So I would add to that, one of the moneymakers for the town can be housing, if it's the right type of housing. Ralph Costello's project on Route 27, off of Route 27, Maple Street, every which way you go, it's called a Maple Street, no matter which one it is. Old Village Square, 42 units built as of right, about 7 units to an acre density. Houses are 10 feet apart. That has one school child living in that 42 units. Pardon?
How much do those units cost?
Oh, they're hugely expensive. The town, my point to you is that the town is making about $600,000 a year of profit net over what we provide to them for services a year, so that we can, it's not just diversifying the tax base, we can build housing that will be profitable to us. Yes, Jerry.
That's why Gus's proposal to take property over here and do some commercial with it would help us. At the same time, we have plenty of space.
There's so much land at the state hospital. We could do some commercial development up there, not just housing. So commercial to bring in, to help lower our tax rate. But I understand the committee's worked hard. I've been to a couple of their meetings. And But it's taking too long. And I'm really hoping this meeting does happen in March. And we need to get, besides the housing, we need some commercial development up at the state hospital to help bring our tax rate down.
Steve, maybe you could talk about the commercial development at the state hospital. My understanding is there's more commercial development planned in the current proposal than is seen as likely to be accepted by the market.
What Pete said is correct. I mean, we have tried to include commercial uses at the hospital, partly in response to the Selectmen's desire to diversify our tax base. The market studies that we had done suggest that the amount of absorption of commercial space is considerably less than the amount of commercial space we're planning. So there's definitely a phased aspect to this. Our hope is that as we get a certain amount of commercial space there, that'll stimulate additional commercial space, but we're pushing the envelope up there as far as including an amount of commercial space. The other thing I might say is we were talking about 40S jokingly, but 40R is the zoning approach that we're taking for the property, including Hinckley and Lot 3. And one of the reasons we're doing that is to obviate the need to go through a 40B process so that it can be quicker. Our zoning would be adopted if we can hold to our schedule and do it in March, and the site could be disposed of to someone who could start building almost immediately because there's very limited permitting necessary if you get the zoning right under 40R. And we also looked at the phasing approach. So we chose Lot 3 and Hinckley in part for senior housing because they're separated from the rest of the campus and something could be done more quickly. The same is true of the southeast quadrant, which we call the cottage area, because that's near the road, doesn't need as much infrastructure work, and could be disposed of relatively quickly. So we have, in fact, been thinking about the senior housing a lot and choosing where it's located, in part because of our desire for that to happen more quickly than the bulk of the project. Dealing with the core campus and those buildings is a complex undertaking, as was noted, and that will take a little longer, so we've tried to peel off parts that could be done more quickly and devote those to senior housing. So that's been part of our strategy.
One of the things I'd like to see at the state hospital is that, as far as senior housing is involved, our floor plans and price points. We haven't even got down to that level yet, and I think that's what we'd like to see. Some hard facts about this is the kind of house we're going to have, this is the first floor, there might be a second floor, there might not, there might be a basement, there might not, be so many square feet, price points are going to be this. This is what we want to see. Otherwise, you're leading us down the road, we don't know what the hell we're going to get at the end of the point, and it's going to be something probably priced beyond what we can afford. So, get some hard facts that show plans, floor plans, and price points, and features of the home. I think you might get more seniors excited about it.
Tony, can I just react, and you want the microphone back? You can. The way I look at this, Tony, is this is a master planning committee. So it's a committee that's taking a look at the overall property and trying to come up with the best configuration, best advice they have on how this property should be developed. And as I look at it, the main objective or the main output of this committee, beyond a concept that does a good job of reflecting what the townspeople said they would like or say they would like up there, is to put in place the zoning changes that are required so that when a developer is asked to develop something, the zoning issue is not at risk. So I think what you're looking for is what I would see as being the work that the committee that follows the master planning committee, which we haven't settled on exactly what to call it or who's on it, but it would be more of a development committee focused on literally putting together specific projects, presumably consistent with what the master plan called for. And I don't think it's fair to ask them for floor plans. It won't be unfair to ask whoever is carrying the ball forward in the next year for floor plans for project. I think it starts in the coming year.
Yes, Brandon.
Brandy Erb, I'm on the State Hospital Master Plan Committee. So the master plan is actually giving a structure guideline for what we would like to see in these different areas or redevelop the buildings. The special town meeting will contains zoning changes so that these changes can occur on the property. The design guidelines, which are part of the master plan, will say, in this area, you can only have single-story buildings. In this area, we're going to allow single-family homes, duplexes, triplexes, but there's nothing multi-story. So those design guidelines that we're going to put in place as part of the master plan will then dictate, when the next committee takes over and disposes of the property, what's allowable there. So at special town meeting, we'll present the master plan overall and show you what those design guidelines are, and that'll show you what is permissible. We won't have actual floor plans at that point, as was said, because we're not designing the buildings. We won't have the actual blueprints to show you, but we'll...
Well, the seniors could help you, we can tell you what you want.
All right. Everyone's always welcome to come to the meetings, by the way. But that'll make it so that the next committee taking over will be able to put out that RFI and ask for the proposals from the developers, and they won't be able to build a 10-story apartment complex on one little piece of property, but that will be able to give you that one-floor, single-family home. And there are condos planned up there as well. And those condos weren't mentioned, but they won't be senior-specific. But if the developer develops them correctly and they're only one bedroom, then they're useful. So
Or even 2 bedrooms is good for seniors.
even 2 bedrooms, but you know,
Bedroom homes that are not necessary to be seniors.
there you go.
Good. When can we see, are we gonna be able to see some ideas that you're presenting before the town meeting? Or are we gonna walk in and get a handout? Because if we don't have a chance to study it ahead of time, I mean, you know, this is a major undertaking. You're gonna hand me a piece of paper on the way in? Or are we gonna get this a week or 2 before?
You will have it as soon as we have it, trust me. And that is, I've tried to send out everything as possible. We've been very transparent, this committee. If we could have held it to a year, we would have held it to a year. But there's been an awful lot of work and there's an awful lot of process to go through all this. The preferred master plan is in place and we are vetting it now. We want to make sure it financially agrees with what the town wants, for the taxpayers, for the developers, and to fulfill all the goals that we've set out.
Is the draft online?
It will be. The website's having a little issue.
Hi, I'm Patty Fiscaldo. I've lived in Medfield for over 70 years, and I have just 2 questions. The first question is the state hospital decided if any of the buildings are going to be torn down?
We have an agreement, a letter of memorandum of agreement with the state that requires any building, and Phil can speak to this probably better than I can, but any building up there, before it is torn down, it has to be approved by the state, and then the Medfield Historic gets their say. So we cannot tear down the buildings.
So
Just
we're
willy-nilly.
nowhere. We're
Well,
nowhere. Working on
if
this
they're-
for so long, and you can't even tell us what building's going to be torn down.
No.
Okay.
We would like to, we have come to the conclusion, we would like to keep as many buildings as possible. That may or may not be possible economically. Some of the buildings are in very bad shape.
Yes, I know that.
And the reason it costs so much to develop them is because of their condition. So we, as a committee, we have assigned uses to these buildings.
When will that be determined?
Well,
You've been working on it for how long, and you still
We've been
cannot
working for
determine what buildings are going to be torn down.
Correct.
This is how slow everything is going. My next question is, if I can remember it, state hospitals, they're planning on an assisted living. What happens to the people that need nursing home? There's not going to be a nursing home around, right? So they'll go into Roxbury to a nursing home. I think that assisted living has to come with some type of a nursing home. Even if it's 20 beds, it's got to have something.
That's why we were talking about the CCRC model that Pete explained. Continuing care, retirement community involves independent units, assisted living, and nursing care. So the idea is you'd have an entire spectrum of facilities at the state hospitals. That's our objective. When you say we haven't determined which buildings are going to be torn down, we're not going to necessarily tear them down ourselves, because we're going to put it out to the market with the desire that the buildings be rehabilitated for the uses that we're indicating. The way our Mass Historic MOU works, we put the RFPs out to developers. We can express a preference for them to preserve the buildings. They come back with bids on it, and we get to choose. And if none of them say they can save the buildings, then the buildings can be torn down. If some can be saved, and that's our preference, then we could choose a developer who chooses to save them. So our plan will not dictate which buildings are going to be torn down. That's going to be driven by the response from developers when we go out to the market.
Do you see how slow this is going?
I appreciate that it's going more slowly than a lot of people, including my wife, would prefer. How many nights have you had? Trust me, we're not doing this just because we enjoy it. There's a lot of people here who have a single objective. But, as someone pointed out, there's 12,000 some residents in the town, and a lot of them have other objectives. You'd be surprised, I know by that. But a lot of people say, we don't want anything up there. Other people say, we want a load of senior housing, which a lot of people in this group do. Other people say, well, we like performing arts up there. Some people say they like housing for millennials up there. So we aren't speaking with one voice in the town. What our job has been is to try and distill this into a plan that can get a 2/3 vote at town meeting. So I think as Mike was saying, you can go to town meeting with any plan you want, but we have to have a plan that 2/3 of the people in town support. So it's been our mission to try to come to a plan that addresses enough people's interests that they'll vote for the plan. If it only addresses one person's interests, people aren't going to vote for it. So I appreciate the frustration, believe me, and we want to get it done ourselves, but we've had a lot of competing concerns, including the financial concern, which has taken a lot of time to address. So I'm sorry that it's taken long. I apologize to you that we didn't do it faster. We're doing the best we can, and we sincerely hope that we'll be ready for a March town meeting. As to the question about will I see the plan in advance, we are trying to finalize this plan so that the first quarter of next year we can do a lot of outreach to different groups in town. We've been very transparent, as Brandy said, at trying to build consensus in town and do a lot of surveying. We're going to continue that to try to make sure people are well informed by the town. They walk through the door at special town meeting.
Steve, thank you to your committee for getting us the best plan rather than the most expedient plan. Jack, go ahead.
Thanks, Pete. And let me say thanks to Steve. There's a wonderful old saying that goes along these lines. The beatings will continue until morale improves. Okay? Let me suggest that we have taken a pound of flesh from the Medfield State Hospital Master Planning Committee tonight. But having spent a lot of time as a member of the Warrant Committee at their meetings, let me commend the quality of their work, let me commend the direction they're doing, let me commend even their sense of urgency. I cannot commend the time frame in which they've done it yet, but they are at a point now where they're close to getting over the top of the hill and taking the objectives that you all want to have taken. So my sense would be that we ought to beat up on them tonight, and we ought to stop it after tonight, and we ought to support them from then on as they get to their objectives, because it's a capable committee really working very, very hard on a volunteer basis for what we want to have happen. Tony, to your point, thank you. Good. Tony, to your point, it isn't just about us. I'm almost 80, and I'm going to say that we have to have a balanced plan that meets 40B needs, that meets commercial needs, that meets senior needs, that meets the needs of the town in terms of schooling for the long term. It isn't just about us. Sorry to say that to you, okay? And what Medfield State Hospital Committee is doing is arriving at a balanced view that reflects the best interests of the town, and in the long term, that's what we've got to have, not a single focus. And I say that at 79 years old. So with that said, let me just ask, are there a couple of actions that we can agree to in this room today? One action is, I'm going to go back to the question of, until we define the need, we can't define the solution. Do we want to do something to define the needs, such as a really good quality survey, by the way, to be done in a 3 or 4 month period, of senior needs for housing, type of housing, cost of housing, phasing of housing. Point one. And point two, let me finish, okay? And point two, I think that the question of Lot 3 and Hinckley to be started soon, okay? Maybe as soon as immediately post our next special town meeting, whenever Medfield State Hospital Master Planning Committee determines that to be, certainly in 2018, that ought to be really kicked off and acted upon now. It gives us a start on senior housing. So let me propose that we might convert ourselves from beating up on our favorite subject, Medfield State Hospital Master Planning Committee, okay? Although I would encourage you to send them a couple of nasty emails if you choose. Okay? So with that, okay, can we move to a couple of constructive actions, possibly a survey, and possibly action on Lot 3 and Hinckley?
I would like to say something.
Yes, ma'am, let me give you this.
Thank you for what you said, and I'd like to thank Carolyn Sunday, by the way.
Thank you.
And I can thank you for all the hard work you've done as well. And I'd like to thank Tony for what he's done. And I think that we are interested in diversity, but I think that we're here representing our own group. And the one thing that was just said that concerns me a little bit is this, is that a survey's great, but I kind of got the impression that you already have it done.
Do we? I don't. I don't know that the type of things that Gus and Tony talked about are specific enough to give us really good direction on what needs to be built, how much, and when.
Excuse me, but I think, I don't know her name, she said it, I'm sure, but the planning committee, she kind of said it's done. Is that the fact? Is it done?
Could I jump in on
We
this?
don't have designs, it's kind of what we said earlier, we don't have designs, so we have numbers of units, so if people here say, well, I'd like 2 bedrooms, I'd like 1 bedroom, first floor, that stuff would all go into an RFP process for this
Okay,
position.
great.
So it's all legitimate feedback, because when we do decide we're gonna do 30, 40 units at the state
That's
hospital,
okay.
we want them to be designed in a way that people want to buy.
Thank you.
So-
That's what I wanted, that
Speaking to the number of
clarification. So if
units
the survey
reflected
was to be done, it would have some impact on what you're doing. It's not a done deal, and the survey.
Could I jump in though?
No, I'd like to say a couple more things. Sorry. What I'd like to say is, one of the reasons I'm here is I heard so much that there's this beautiful senior housing with the 3 bedrooms and the 2 baths and all of that. And I think that might be, and I don't know, but that's why I'm here, is to get information. If that's why it costs $500 million, I think that the seniors need to speak up more, because I don't think we really want 3-bedroom apartments or houses. Also, I don't think anyone wanted a 10-story condominium, but Sherman has a beautiful 3-story condominium. And there are alternatives to what has been presented. The other thing is I don't know what the term is, but we talk about condominiums, and we talk about the land. I know that in Boston, on Perkins Street, it's a very big condominium. But it's called something else, and I know it's big in New York City as well. What is it? Cooperatives, where they don't own the land. So I don't know if that's something that you discussed or thought about, is that the town actually keeps the land, and the people purchase the condominiums. So, thank you very much.
I want to react to all the comments because there's a piece of confusion, I think, in your starting point. And Jack, you can correct me if what you were talking about in the survey isn't what I think you were talking about in the survey. The survey I was calling for, I would not have looked to the State Hospital Master Planning Committee to do. I would have, at this point, unless the Senior Housing Study Committee says they're not the right place to do it, this is a question of what is the survey of the town's need for senior housing, not just a survey of what needs to go up at the state hospital. I wouldn't expect this committee to do that. This is that full picture. In fact, probably 9 months ago, 6 months ago, I went to a state hospital master planning committee meeting after the draft report from the senior housing committee came out, and my question was, are you guys using this? And of course, at that point, the report hadn't even really circulated very much. But in order for the master planning committee to know what it should be addressing by way of senior housing at on the state hospital campus, it would be really, really good if we had a town-wide picture of what the total senior housing need is. Tony, I'll throw it at you. I don't know what the right way to do it is, but my first thought would be to look in your direction, your committee's
In
direction.
our study, we did a survey of 143 people, which represents probably 280 households. So we have something started. It isn't the best, but it's got a lot of good information in it, and I just hope you don't discount it, and it costs you nothing.
Right. No, I'm not discounting what you've done, but I think what I'm getting at is what Jack is asking for seems to me to be a logical continuation of that to get a better definition.
Here, here.
Are there any more questions? So I thought that maybe I would just ask you guys a bunch of questions, as long as you've all come together. I'd be curious to know your feelings on a number of different things, and maybe if people could just show with a show of hands their feelings about different things. My first question is, when you think about your next home, is it something that you want to own versus rent?
What are you asking?
I'm asking whether you want an ownership option or a rental option. So who'd be willing to rent, I guess is what I'm looking
Depends on
for.
the price, Pete. If the rent's gonna be high, I just assume own. If the rent is really low, you'd be crazy not to rent.
Well, let me ask you it this way then. Who would be willing to consider a rental? All right, so that's maybe half the people. How about, do people care about whether it's an attached or a single, like the units for Hinckley are separate ranch houses. Do people care if they're attached or if they're detached? How many want a detached? How about a townhouse? Anybody interested in a townhouse? How about an apartment, about a multi-story building? An apartment type building or a condo building with an elevator? How about if the choice were between downtown and the hospital, who would want it downtown? Prefer the downtown. How about would prefer the hospital site? So the hospital wins that one. The Dale Street school may be coming available, so that might, the town could maybe eventually turn that into housing. Any other questions you guys wanted to ask?
I have a question. I don't think we finished the question that Gus had, and that was the study. How do we get a study done? If the hospital committee, this is Rich Ryder from Pilgrim Lane, by the way. If the hospital study group is the right group, and I don't necessarily think that they are either, what are the other options for a survey? Does the town pay that? I've seen study groups and other things proposed at town meeting to fund some sort of a research team. So what are the options available to us?
I think the selectmen would decide whether or not it's something that they want to do, and it sounds to me like we probably do. And then the selectmen would just have to find the money for it because it hasn't been budgeted for this year, but we'd have to figure out how to find money to make it happen.
So when could the selectmen team get back to us with what they found in terms of the feasibility of a survey, in the funding of a survey?
So just in terms of going ahead and not doing the survey, but just making the decision to do the survey, you're
Well, I think I just heard you say that there's a general consensus probably that the selectmen would want to at least look into the feasibility of a survey.
I'm in favor of it. I thought I heard Gus say that he's in favor of it, so that that's the majority of us at least.
Okay, so now that we have that agreement, then what's the next step?
We can put it on the warrant for the town meeting this year.
So you'll do that?
There'd be an appropriation for it, and the selectmen decide what's on the warrant, and we can put an article on the town meeting warrant for the survey, a professional, rigorous market survey.
I was gonna say, what about an option here? So I have a couple thoughts. First off, if Jack is right, and it can be done in 3 or 4 months, which that tells me it was not an expensive survey, and it's a relatively focused survey. The question I'd have for all of you, and Tony, I'm gonna put you on the spot again, but actually not by yourself, who would be the best, who would be best suited to conduct this kind of survey into the senior housing needs in town? Should the selectmen form a new committee other than the Senior Housing Study Committee? Should we supplement the Senior Housing Study Committee? Is that just a totally bad idea? I don't know why you even suggested it, Gus.
I opt for the last option. I would think that we would just hire somebody.
Yes.
Jack is talking about just hiring a professional survey person to do it.
Exactly.
Okay, then under those circumstances, we have the downtown improvement. The budget that we use, I don't know, Mark, how easy we could use it, but we have money in the budget for, it's kind of the downtown improvement budget that may, yeah, so we may actually be, rather than wait for town meeting, because that also then starts rolling into all the other things that we're not doing. If this is something can be done for reasonable money in a reasonable amount of time, I'd rather go into town meeting with knowing what the answer to the survey is. And I think we may have a vehicle to fund it as long as it's not outrageously expensive.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is that it won't go before the town meeting, that the selectmen will try to find a outside vendor to perform the survey. When could the selectmen report back to us when that is going to start?
We'll put it on our agenda for December 19th. We'll decide in the interim how to fund it, and we'll give you a timetable after December 19th.
And if I wanted to follow up, with whom should I contact? Okay, so on the December 20th, I'll be up at Town Hall asking about how things went.
I would like a Sunday dark roast.
I will be there.
You could just come to the meeting on the 19th as well.
I will be at both.
Please do. You can sit next to Bill.
From a timing standpoint, I would guess that a study like that wouldn't start until after the new year. So we can make a decision, we can determine that we have money. We're going to then have to find a consultant to do it, and I would assume the study is not going to start before the new year.
That's my back of the room, yes.
Gentlemen, I bought my house in 1982. My kids were educated in the school system. I have a 4-bedroom colonial, and I really don't want to move out of town. I don't want to move into assisted living or subsidized housing or anything like that. I want to stay in my own home. What can you do to reduce my taxes to make it more affordable for my wife and I to live in town?
Senior tax write-off.
I'll start off. I've already, you may not have been here at the start. The way I'm looking at it, the things we can do, we can work to diversify the tax base so that the taxes are not so reliant on personal property. We can find options for you to, if you said you don't want to sell your house, it would be a lot harder to answer this question. We can work to develop alternative housing, which would be lower cost housing, where if you want, you can sell that 4-bedroom house and you can buy another lower cost, more reasonably priced house that would be more suitable for what you need now if your kids are gone. And there are some options we talked about here that may or may not work for you if you've got a 4-bedroom house, around ways that the town might be able to establish town control. I guess more like the Turtlebrook thing, where there's a bit of town control over the price. The other alternative is that we can look to develop rental housing, not cheap little, but decent rental housing, where you can actually sell your house, bring in your equity, invest your equity, pay tax, pay rent, not pay taxes. And sitting there with the state hospital campus, looking out over the Charles River, somewhere in there, there's got to be a really useful, creative, and attractive way to put that kind of housing up there in a way that at least some people here in the room would probably really like, within walking distance of a canoe launch and a whole bunch of trails and beautiful views in all directions.
I would prefer to stay where I am and just have a lower tax base.
Can't that,
Less taxes.
You might want to consider an in-law apartment.
That's not easy.
It's kind of a simple idea, but I mean, a lot of people in other towns are allowing.
Mark, are you aware if the Sudbury special legislation went anywhere on this?
They won't go anywhere.
Okay.
Pete, I disagree about the survey. We did, Jerry Pazange, and I'm on the Senior Housing Committee, we did a survey, and we got all types of responses. Some people want this, some people want that, and you're gonna get the same thing again. People are gonna say, I want this, I want that, I want this, but Steve said it already. They're planning on all types of different housing up there. So why bother with the survey? It's just gonna tell us we want a mixture of housing. They already know that. Now the question you're asking is, how many units you want? You know, you're not gonna know that. You can, there are people who do that type of thing, you know, like actuaries, like insurance type people, actuaries, they'll figure those things out for you, they'll guesstimate. But you're really not gonna know until it gets started. My wife, I've been trying to get my wife to move out of Medfield. My son's in Hopkinton. We've been in town since 1978, right? We moved here in 78. My son went through the schools. He lives in Hopkinton. I'm trying to get my wife to move to condos in Hopkinton. She won't budge. She likes her house. So I'm stuck. But my point is, one place I wanted to go to, she didn't want to go there because they're still building it. I don't want to live in a construction zone, she said. I don't want to hear those trucks all day long. But here's the problem. Now that they're done, the price went up considerably. So my point is, you're not going to be able to know exactly what you got until it starts. Then people will say, yeah, I want to go there. Those look nice. That's what's going to happen. So the survey is not going to tell you anything we don't know already. Save the money.
Any more comments, questions? Thank you, everybody. Appreciate your input. Appreciate your listening.
The preceding was a production of Medfield TV, Community Shows.